Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. Except, am I on the wrong program? I think I am. I'm not an evangelical. I guess I better invite a couple of my favorite evangelicals, Steve Pineacre and Dr. Chris Thomas. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Yeah, well.
Thanks for doing this, dude.
Yeah, this is a special episode. It's the 100th episode of Mormon Book Reviews. And so Steve asked me to be the guest host. And I'm still curious, how are you guys still studying Mormonism? That's kind of strange, you know, evangelicals. You guys, by the way, I have to say something. On Reddit, there was a big thing about Rick Bennett. I can't believe he doesn't like evangelicals. And I was like, that was totally taken out of context. I like cool evangelicals like you two, but some of them are really annoying, just like Mormons can be really annoying. So it's not that I hate Mormons or hate evangelicals, it's just certain evangelicals. So you two are my favorites. Anyway, so Steve, how's it been for the last year of doing Mormon book reviews?
It's been pretty awesome, and it's been a wild ride, to say the least. I wasn't expecting all this to have happened, you know, just to have all the guests that I've had on, and from Richard Bushman to Sandra Tanner, but you know, just the whole idea of this show was just to review the books in my collection, and maybe I'll get an author on now and then, you know, and so I had this dream of, I'll review a Pentecostal reads the Book of Mormon, because that's the perfect convergence, you know. And then I remember thinking, you know, I think I'm going to contact the Pentecostal Theological Seminary and say, this is Steve Pineacre from Mormon Book Reviews, and I need Christopher Thomas's email address. You know, I sounded like I was really this big shot, you know, oh, yes, sir, you know, we'll get it together, everything. So, and then I emailed Christopher, and he sent me a very nice email back. And so that was kind of like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like, people want to talk to me. And then, of course, I got in touch with you, Rick, via your Gospel Tensions newsletter email. I wasn't sure if you got your emails there, because I sent one a few years before. I didn't hear anything back. So I just thought, well, I'll just give it a try. And next thing you know, I'm on the phone with you for like 2.5 hours, and you agreed to come on my program. And it's been just kind of a wild ride since then. You know, it's hard for me to just even comprehend what's happened. But I'd say within about 2 or 3 weeks of me doing this, I knew I was onto something. I knew people took attention to were starting to take attention to what I was doing. And it just has been really just a fantastic journey ever since. And it really has been like not only a journey just to be able to talk to a lot of interesting people, but I would also say on a spiritual level, it's also been part of that journey as well. It's affected me.
Well, very cool. It's been fun to be your friend and watch your channel grow. And it has grown and even passes me sometimes. I don't know if I like that, but you're doing a great job.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's part of the reason I wanted you to come on to do this, was because I thought, well, first of all, it'd be fun to do it. But two, you know, you taking me under your wing like you did early on, not knowing much about me, really was such a big thing. And it was so important to me, and it still is. And so I thought, okay, I got the first guest that I actually interviewed was you. The very first book that I reviewed was Christopher's, and also the very first scholar interview was Christopher. And we're all just three, you know, we all get along so well. I thought this would be the perfect venue to have this kind of conversation, just a retrospective, if you will, and just kind of talk and just kind of hash things out and go from there. But, you know, our friend down here, he needs to put in a couple words too, I think.
Yeah, Chris. So tell us, you know, I think I've heard that for an evangelical studying Mormonism, it's like a visitor in a foreign land. Is that how it is?
Well, it's more like being a unicorn, right? There aren't all that many of us, and but you know, the reception has always proven to be really nice. And I want to congratulate Steve on his 100th episode. That's quite a milestone, and have enjoyed seeing all that develop. He talked about earlier, Rick, it really exploded with Richard Bushman and Sandra Tanner. And I'm thinking, well, wait a second, Rick and I were on here. What does that say about us?
Yeah, we're not nearly as big. This is them, that's for dang sure.
That's exactly right.
Well, I have to say that, I mean, even a lot of people, I think that the reason why I get all these guests on is because of Richard Bushman, but I actually was talking to a lot of the people I booked, like Daniel Stone and Don Bradley, already had agreed to come on my program before I even had the inkling of inviting Bushman on, and also Sandra Tanner agreed to come on. So it was just such a feather in my cap to have him on. I don't know if too many, maybe yours, Rick, but I think outside of maybe yours, I'm probably about the only guy that could book right now Dan Vogel and Richard Bushman. I just can't think of a lot of venues that could do that. And then I'm talking to other people that at BYU that will also add to that dimension as well, that I just think that's what's so wild about this whole thing, is being able to talk to just about everybody and not have one single person turn me down. Everybody I've asked has agreed to come on. Now, one or two haven't returned my emails, but they haven't turned me down. But just to have that response was so shocking to me.
You're doing better than me. I've had more than one turn me down.
Yeah, and I'm waiting. I can't wait actually for it to finally happen. Then I can say, oh, and it was so and so that finally broke the streak. Like Cal Ripken's streak.
So, Steve, tell us more. What are some of the big things that you feel like you've learned over the past year as a studier of Mormon studies?
Well, I guess I didn't really realize how everybody is just so sequestered in their little worlds, and they don't talk to each other, and they don't really know about each other. So like when I'm talking to a BYU professor at the Mormon History Association, and I'm saying, yeah, and the very first Church of the Restoration I ever went to was the Church of Jesus Christ, your Pentecostal cousins, the Bickertons. And like, I didn't know we had Pentecostal cousins. And I was just so shocked by that, because to me, it's like, I've been reading about that church for years and wanting to get to know them. So that was like a really big surprise, was that. And also, just the lack of knowledge. Like, so you have people who are specialists, they're in their studies and they know it, and they know it very well. So that's one thing. You're going to have blind spots if you have a specialty in the academic, community, obviously. But even just general folk don't really know a whole lot about other people. So now with this channel, I'm meeting those people who do know all these other groups. Now, of course, John Hamer is probably like your top academic that knows, and Steve Shields, they know everybody,
Right.
and they're aware of all the different movements. But outside of them, it's just fascinating to me to talk to all these different groups. Now, the smaller groups all know about the Salt Lake branch, but the people in the LDS Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they don't know a whole lot about these other Book of Mormon believing churches that believe that their church was founded by Joseph Smith.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I'll tell you a story. I picked up my nephew and niece, take them to the airport for Christmas. They were at BYU. And I said, so how many other Mormon churches besides the Community of Christ are there? And they were like 6, 12. I was like, you guys are way, way wrong. So Chris, tell us more about, has things changed much? Because you've been on, well, I guess it's been about a year and a half. You've been on I'll call the big three: Mormon Stories, Gospel Tangents, and Mormon Book Reviews. What have you learned? Tell us about your last year and a half on all three of those podcasts.
Oh, goodness. Well, I've learned that apparently all podcasters are tall because you all three kind of tower over me, which doesn't say perhaps much for you, but anyway. Well, it's been it's been an interesting ride. I am not necessarily a publicity hound, and so when I would get these invitations, they mean a lot to me. But I really enjoy most of all the conversations. Of course, I'd known of Mormon Stories a long time and had watched a lot of that, and I came across Gospel Tangents, and it was on Gospel Tangents that I encountered a number of folk for the first time as well. And I was recently I'd recently gone back and viewed On Mormon Stories, John's interview with Jared and Tyler on the murder among the Mormons. And I remembered that you had done some interviews pretty early on, Rick, with different individuals. And I hadn't seen the Shannon Flynn interviews since I first watched them. And I think John said in his interview that you had access to the less flamboyant Shannon. And, you know, it was a great set of interviews.
Thank you.
I think in some ways it's kind of the state of the art interview on Shannon, because I think he was in a different place physically and perhaps emotionally, and I thought you did a great job there. And then of course had to go back and watch your interview with my old friend Kurt Bench and some of the other interviews that you've done. So, you know, I remember the first time I met both of you, John and you, that I felt like I knew you guys already, but that you didn't know me. And then, of course, when somebody reviews your book for their very first session on a channel they're launching, well, you know, it's like I tell my granddaughter, you'll always be my first grandchild, no matter what else happens, right? So, you know, that's an honor as well. And of course, the three of us have become good friends. And I'm amazed if we can even do a podcast together anymore, because the conversations go off in all directions at the same time. But, you know, I've been surprised a little bit in the way people reach out. I think on all the podcasts I've been on the Mormon book, you know, I'll get these kind of emails out of the blue from people who had seen it, want to interact, want to engage, and so, you know, I've been really appreciative of that, and you know, just see it as an opportunity to talk with folk primarily for whom the book functions as scripture, and the Book of Mormon, that is. And so, yeah, that's been a lovely development as from my vantage point, and always treated quite royally. And so, yeah, that I think that's it.
Well, it's good to have you as a celebrity in the Mormon book world. So
That's right.
Well, thanks so much. I'm not used to that.
So one thing I just want to read to you, Christopher, somebody wrote this on a comment on one of our interviews. It says, "Hi, Steve, thank you so much for your channel. I really appreciate the spirit in which you are going about this. As an inactive LDS, your videos have been church for me today. They touch my heart and refresh my spirit and my faith of the common body of Christ and in God's grace. Shalom." And then he later on went and watched part 3 of when I recommend, hey, watch part 3 of the Mormon Stories interview of Christopher Thomas. So later on, he comes on and comments and he said, Steve, I was watching it and I started crying watching that episode. So it's kind of cool to know that there are people watching our interview right now, or any number of the interviews, and they're being touched by them, you know, and you know, to me, like, that just really touches me to hear it. I get messages like this all the time, you know, and I feel like really honored and privileged to be able to do that. And I think that, you know, Chris, what you've done is amazing, because, you know, you took the Book of Mormon seriously with your book and didn't mock it and make fun of it. And as a result, you have a lot of people who really appreciate you. And then I get the same love from people, you know, and I think that's kind of what it's about. It's a relational thing. You know, so I just want to say that, you know, that's important to me. That's really been one of the biggest surprises, is that it's the personal, relational aspect of it too.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think especially these days when, you know, public discourse and conversations are at a minimum, that it's nice to be able just to talk to people, and you find out pretty quickly who is interested in conversation and dialogue and who isn't. Not only on, any of the sides of certain issues these days, but the kind of, I don't know what the best way to put it. There's a sense in which the restoration is rather fragmented in terms of the different groups. I mean, Pentecostalism is certainly fragmented, so that's not a slam. But it's interesting, I think, the people that don't know of one another, and just the willingness of people to engage if you are respectful to them. And that's one of the things about both of your podcasts that has been really helpful to me is something called gospel tangents. You're expecting some tangential folk. I think I remember saying to Rick, you don't get more tangential than a Pentecostal on gospel tangents talking about the Book of Mormon. But I think the time I learned of Daniel Stone, for example, Rick, was on gospel tangents, and Daniel and I have become really good friends.
Daniel is a great man. He's a great guy.
He really is, and there's so many others that's true of. And then, of course, Steve, who seems to specialize in the folk on the margin. I mean, I think both of those are such great services to people who are interested in that kind of engagement. I remember when I first started working on Book of Mormon, and I realized that not too many people in Utah seem to know too many people in Community of Christ. And I said, there's not that many of you in terms of Book of Mormon scholars. I don't know why you don't talk to one another, why you don't know one another, right?
We had 150 years of enmity with over polygamy, so that's a big reason.
Well, there you go. There you go. But I mean, I think the way you guys reach out, that's a great service. And I think Steve, who would have known the kind of favor you would have found with your startup. I know that Rick has been really instrumental in kind of fostering you along, in a sense. And I think, one of the things you both seem to excel at is actually reading the books of the people you have on, right? You don't always get that. And, having really interesting conversations, but also allowing people to kind of put things in their words and have a forum for all that. And I don't know any authors that are not vain enough to come on and talk about their book.
I know a few. They'll stay nameless, but I do know a few.
Anonymity has its place.
That's, it's so true, Rick. What Chris was saying was, I watched, Mormon Stories, and then I came across your channel. Probably it has to be about 4 years ago now, So I remember you had a catalog of episodes. So I started watching those once I found you. And, but I loved it. I mean, I bought so many of the books. Some of the people that came on your program, I bought their books. Like I went to Don Bradley and I said, I just want you to understand, Don, I bought the book because I saw you on the interview. I had no intention to have it like a show and I'm going to have you on. I said, I love this subject. I'm so passionate about it. But what was so important to me was watching your program. And so like Mormon Stories is an interesting program because when he has scholars on, that's what I'm most interested in, when he's talking to the different scholars and stuff like that. And his format's different, than yours. Yours is a little more, was different than John's. And sometimes John kind of becomes like Oprah a little bit, with his show. And sometimes not all those episodes really interest me as much. But basically, I watch every single episode that you put out because I'm genuinely interested in just about every single episode. But when I think back, when I was devising like 3 or 4 different YouTube channels in my mind, I remember I got inspiration from this Pentecostal in Albany, Georgia, had this book review channel. And he, half the time he didn't even read the book. He said, I got this stash of books from Ollie's, and here, let me talk about this one, didn't even read them. And the guy's got 3 million views. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. If this guy, no production values whatsoever, I think it's his wife filming him, and he's just sitting there with his table with his books, and let's see what I got next. But he used to be a Bible salesman, so he was an expert on Bibles. So that's interesting, where he gives you interesting stuff about Bibles and stuff like that. And then my second inspiration was this guy who had this YouTube channel called LDS Book Reviews. And so I thought, I can do that. And then it was you. Yeah, your channel. Those are my 3 major influences early on. When I was putting something together, those were the 3 that I was kind of trying to pattern myself after. So I took a little bit from each one, and thus I have this program. So you definitely, from the very beginning, and of course, Christopher, I bought your book years ago too. I wasn't planning on having you on, that's just how it is. But yeah, you're so, like, Gospel Tangents is so intertwined in this whole endeavor. It helped me. One of the things that really helped me with your show was it helped me to speak Mormonese. Hearing the cadence, the way the talk, and same with Mormon stories. It's just.
I hope I don't sound like I'm on general conference.
No, but just how you just talk with each other, And I picked that up with Mormon stories. I picked that up as well. Just like, it's just fascinating to me, like how many times they use comic book references in conversation. And then there's also a lot of references to musicals and Disney movies. It's amazing to hear adults talking about comic books and Disney movies and integrating it into their conversations. Even John Berlin does that. It's just like so thoroughly intertwined into the lingo, more so than it is in our world. And I just find it truly fascinating.
Well, and the thing that I love about both of you guys is the fact that you're both bridge builders, and that's what we need more of. We need way more. We've got way too many wall builders, and we need bridge builders that go between Mormons and evangelicals. And I know I've made a lot of comments about how evangelicals drive me crazy, because some of them do, but some of them are cool. Just like Mormons are cool, and some of them are jerks. Like I could tell you lots of Mormon jerks.
Well, you guys talk about you talk about Mormon cringe. There's plenty of evangelical cringe out there. There's so many things that really bother me, dude, when I see on TV. So trust me. And then of course, yeah, there's jerks. On my channel, anybody who watches my channel knows I'm much harder on Christians than I ever am on the Restoration. Because I just get so upset with the ignorance and the intolerance and the bigotry and all that's just, and the vitriol that's just tossed at you guys. I don't see Christ in that. So when somebody's doing it in the name of our movement, and just to differentiate, I'm more evangelical, but with a charismatic bent, charismatic renewal. And Christopher, it comes from the Pentecostal tradition. You can lump us together in the evangelical thing together. I use the term more evangelical, and Christopher uses the term more Pentecostal. But Christopher, we talk about some of the wild, crazy things that we have in our movement, and then just the people and the personalities that drive us nuts as well.
No, that's right. That's right. Exactly.
So,
well, and I'm still impressed. I know, Chris, we were joking on my podcast about, you've kind of stayed under the radar for Pentecostals, and I was like, are you going to get in trouble? Are you still not in trouble?
Well, I was good till Gospel Tangents, and then my fame swept across the planet like locusts.
Well, I hope you got a lot of book sales out of that.
That's right. That's right. Well, no, I think it's a combination of not really being kind of countercultural in terms of the the mantra of the day, in terms of everybody wants to be known, right? And everybody's doing things to get noticed, etc. Well, I think it is, for the most part, under the radar. I would say that I am much better known for my Book of Mormon work in restoration circles than I am in Pentecostal circles.
Really?
Yeah.
Because you've done a lot of other studies in like the Bible and things like that, right?
Yeah.
How come you're not better known?
That would be what I'm known for, however much I am known in kind of Pentecostal circles and other circles, is the biblical study stuff. The Book of Mormon studies for most of those folk would be kind of a head scratcher, whereas amongst restoration folk, it's their bread and butter, and they're interested in, well, what do you make of it, right? And how are you coming at it, and have you prayed the prayer, and that sort of thing. But on the Pentecostal side, the most response I tend to get are from folk that will come around and say, my uncle is LDS, or I have an aunt who's Community Christ, or what have you. And so for me, it was just kind of whatever, to whatever extent it's been successful, it was just kind of a perfect storm of my own kind of methodological approach to texts being reading with the grain. And most of the folk in the restoration that find out what I'm up to are very appreciative of that. And I think Grant Hardy had done something at some point saying, I think it was in his understanding, if we don't start with Joseph, can we at least talk about the Book of Mormon? And I think by all means, and that's kind of how I've come at that. And I think for the most part, before that, everybody comes to it by way of Joseph, right? The folk for whom it functions as scripture, the folk for whom it absolutely does not function as scripture. It all starts there. And in a lot of ways, what's in the book itself kind of gets lost, right? And so it's an odd kind of existence in some ways that I've kind of stumbled into. I'm not bright enough to have designed it all, but about the time I think it's run its course, then something else develops, another door opens, or something like that. So I'm quite, my head spins with it sometimes. And I thought when the book was finished, that might be whatever contribution I can make, that might be it. But I've landed in the middle of this year, for example. I think I was invited to do 3 to 5 article length studies on the Book of Mormon, and about that many on some biblical and Pentecostal kind of topics. So that's, I'm surprised by all that. It just kind of seems to have a life of its own, if you will.
Well, and I know Mormon studies is a lot smaller than biblical studies, and that probably part of it is, hey, if we can get any outsider interested in it, we're going to take them up on that.
Oh yeah, no, I was in the section I did on origins, which was the last section of the book, as you'll recall, and I wasn't much interested in that because that's what everybody's done, and that's where all the fights are. And I was telling someone, I was having lunch one day in the is it the Joseph Smith building up above Temple Square?
Right. Yeah.
That lovely view from the restaurant there. And
yeah,
I'd got given a seminar at the Church History Library, and I was telling one of the scholars what I was thinking of doing, and he kind of pulls me aside and says, "Hey, look, you're an outsider. If you are friendly about this, you can say whatever you want. You don't have to worry about offending everybody, because we don't have that many outsiders that are genuinely interested." And I do believe that's part of the novelty and the unicornness of it all.
Well, and I have to say, it's funny. I appreciate Steve I've always wanted to go to the Firm Foundation conference. And Steve got me a ticket, and that was really nice. But I was amazed at how many people were like, "Oh, Steve Pinecker," And I think one or two people knew who I was, but I was amazed at how well Steve is known. You're just a publicity hound, Steve.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I just had somebody message me on YouTube saying, I was there at that conference, and my son went to me and said, there he is. He said, no, that's not him. And now I've been kicking myself ever since that I didn't come and shake your hand. I'm like, wow. It's weird. Well, fans.
The other funny thing is, it seems like you, especially with the smaller groups, you're well known among the Bickertonites and what was the other group? I'm trying to remember. Oh, probably the Restoration branches, I think it was, with Patrick McKay. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about how it's been to get to know those two groups specifically?
Yeah, very, very interesting. I was always fascinated by the Bickerton organization, Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints. And
no Latter-day Saints.
Church of Jesus Christ. I'm always like, I gotta have that on there. Make sure I get the whole name in there.
See, I don't worry about that. I'm just it's the LDS Church is fine.
I'm just trying to follow the prophet.
You're better than me, I guess. But we're gonna get you baptized here soon, Steve. Keep that up.
So yeah, it was. I've always been so fascinated by that church, and there's hardly anything out there about it. They don't really publish much. I knew they had like a publishing house in Michigan. I read everything I possibly could read about them. Much of that was on Wikipedia, and which, by the way, folks, most of your restoration stuff about the branches of restoration on Wikipedia originally was written by John Hamer. So I was probably reading John Hamer long before I didn't even knew who he was. And so I just was so fascinated because I thought this church is, they're practicing the gifts. They believe in the Book of Mormon, but I don't know much about them. So when you had Daniel Stone on, that was so awesome. Like, I loved those interviews because I finally got to see a name and a face and a person. And I was like,
it was my first time too, because I had wanted to meet a Bickertonite forever. And then somebody, I think it was in Mormon Historians Facebook group, they were like, hey, there's this new book on William Bickerton and Daniel Stone's the author. And so I immediately reached out, and I couldn't wait for that book to come out. So he's the first and only Bickertonite I know, except for Alice Cooper.
Right. Yes. I would love to get him on.
Although I've not met Alice Cooper. I just know, know who he is.
So I just found the church so fascinating and interesting to me. And so reading that book was great, because it really told us, it's just a fantastic, and you can't help but love William Bickerton reading that book, and just really just know that he was a very sincere man. And so I got in touch with the Church of Jesus Christ via Patrick McKay, who's with the Independent Restoration branches. Patrick McKay's congregation was the very first congregation to leave the RLDS in 1984 when they first started ordaining women. And so he was from that break-off group right away. Now, it's so ironic because I actually know one of the first women that was ordained by the RLDS is also a friend of mine. So it was her ordination in one sense that got Patrick and his church to leave. So it all started with really my love affair with these groups started when on a Saturday night, I get a call out of the blue from Patrick McKay. Now, Paul Luby, who's a book publisher in Independence, Missouri, I ordered some books from him, and he told me, you got to talk to Patrick because this is somebody you got to meet. So I said, well, give him my number. Here's my contact information. Just out of the blue, he calls me on a Saturday night. And the very first thing we start talking about within a few minutes, he starts talking about the Songs of Zion hymnal. But I didn't know at the time it was a hymnal. I just thought about this lady that just was writing these songs. And as soon as he started telling the story, I was like, oh, this is familiar to me. I've heard this before. So being involved in the charismatic movement, these are the stories I heard growing up. But when I heard him tell me the story, it literally changed the trajectory of the channel, where it was supposed to be more scholarly and less, it was going to be a scholarly secular channel. But then I realized, whoa, I'm talking to believers here. See, that's the thing. I wasn't thinking like that. And they're going to bring that to the table. So he tells me about the hymnal, and then I get in touch with then he gets in touch with the people of the Church of Jesus Christ up north of Tampa. The very first church that I visited is there, and people there already knew who I was because the people in the church watched my interview with Patrick McKay and watched some of my other videos. And so, of course, I just was immediately embraced by the church and was thoroughly impressed with them as a people. And the church is just a great church. And it was a lovely experience that I had. So then, to just fast forward a little bit, because you had asked about both groups, is later on in the summer, Patrick McKay asked me on camera while I was filming him, hey, why don't you come and speak at the Book of Mormon rally in October? I'm like, let me think about that. And then I was talking to Christopher, and I went to Christopher and I said, you know, Christopher, I'm supposed to be at that rally. I'm supposed to be there. Now, you got to understand, when a charismatic and a Pentecostal are talking to each other, and they go say, you know, brother, I'm supposed to be there. Enough said, right? The other's, okay, I got you. No explanation. That was Christopher. He's like, okay. Now, if you tell that to a Calvinist, they'll be like, what do you mean? but so I knew, like, I felt like, okay, no, I need to be there. And because I love Patrick. So I actually made the drive up to the Independence area and spoke at the rally. And what was really cool was, first of all, had the mission president was there, top of people with the LDS Church were there. You had all the different groups that are based out there were there. It was a couple hundred people there from all the different restoration of the branches. Had a wonderful time at the rally. Representatives from just about every branch spoke at it, including Casey Griffiths from BYU was the LDS representative. Well, the next morning they had a church service in Patrick's basement, and it was a mixture. There were LDS and Church of Jesus Christ, and there were members of Patrick's group in there. I got there a little late because I was getting my hotel stuff taken care of and all that. And so I'm sitting there, and then at the very end, Patrick McKay goes to me and says, Brother Steve, would you do the closing prayer? So here you have this evangelical giving a closing prayer at a restorationist service with a professor from BYU there, right? And I was just like, wow, this is like very unusual to be having these experiences. So this is very touching to me. Like, this really has impacted me on a very powerful level, because that was not what I was expecting. But to be able to have people like just feel the spiritual kinship with me and want to fellowship with me and ask me to do prayers with them, and just so you know, to top it all off, I get Becky Tarbuck on, Arlene Buffington's daughter, and this has 239 songs. They got one more song left that needs to be put to press. And I get a message from Becky Tarbuck, and she goes to me and she said, Steve, I rewatched your video. We're writing the history of the Songs of Zion. I'm writing you into the history of the Songs of Zion. You're going to be part of the history of this hymnal. And I'm like, whoa, I mean, this was so cool to me. So just to have it all start with a phone call on Saturday night before I even taped an episode, to then full circle, attending services, giving closing prayer, and now included in the history of this wonderful story.
Well, that's cool. I think you're a wonderful bridge builder, and I think we need to do more bridge building. I think the LDS Church is getting better with a lot of the restoration groups. They're still a little standoffish with the polygamous groups, and I like, I love that Chris is working with BYU, and I don't know how formal all those things are. I know there are some things with like Richard Muau of the, do you guys know what seminary he's with?
Fuller.
Yeah, Fuller Theological Seminary. And I love the bridge building, and I can't say that was one of my goals, was bridge building. I'm just curious. Like, I've always wanted to know about the Bickertonites and the Strangites, and I've got the House of Aaron coming on here soon, and all of these different obscure groups. Most Mormons have never heard of these groups, and I'm amazed how small some of them are. I guess in a sense, I'm a bridge builder in that way. But I'm just curious. Anybody that treats me with respect, I'm more than happy to talk to them. And I appreciate that you guys are bridge builders, and I love both Steve and Chris, how you've done well with bridge building, especially across Mormon evangelical lines, and I really appreciate that.
Well, it's one of the really kind of rewarding things is when you move from what I sometimes call from the front porch conversations to the back porch conversations. When you're talking with people and everybody's guards are down, they're not suspicious of your motives or you of that or of them. And I've just had some really delightful moments like that at BYU when I've been invited into classes, and it's almost like they forget that there's a Gentile among them, and you're hearing these conversations that they move off script really quick. And so whatever it is, that's the official kind of face of the church, you're getting these other sorts of dimensions that kind of flesh it all out. It's a little bit like when I would go around to these historic sites in the LDS tradition, and usually when I would tell somebody what I was up to, they would, the missionaries, and most of them were senior missionaries that I was encountering, they came off script immediately. And I'll never forget being in, well, I am forgetting, aren't I? Being at the place where the thing gets published, right? In
B.B. Grandin building.
Yeah. And it was a really rainy day, and I'm the only one in the building. And I go upstairs, and there's this older gentleman, and I tell him what I'm up to, and he says, well, come back here behind the desk here, and let me show you all this stuff. He's just telling me everything. And then he says, and you see that pedestal over there? There used to be a 1830 edition on that, but they needed it in Salt Lake. And when things go to Salt Lake, they never come back. Well, that's not on the script, right? It's just these really lovely times. And that's, I had a friend at one of the Book of Mormon Studies Association meetings who's not LDS either. And he said to me, I think we're the only two Gentiles that are here. And I thought, oh, well, that may be right, but I wasn't thinking of things that way because I was in the middle of a lot of friends, right? And I think I just think there's lots there. I do want to mention, Rick, one thing I'd forgotten to mention in talking about Gospel Tangents, and that was your introduction of me to Matt Harris. I didn't know Matt. I'd never heard his name that I recall. And buddy, I was just mesmerized because he's the real deal.
Oh, I know he is. And I have to tell you, because when I met Matt, I was like, I feel like I discovered you, Matt.
Well, and so after that, I bought some of his stuff, and we arranged to have a Zoom meeting, and he was on with Steve. You've introduced me to just a lot of people in that regard. And of course, Steve, through you've introduced me virtually. And of course, Steve has actually introduced me to a lot of people from his shameless hawking of my book. And so, to me, I feel like I've been the beneficiary of all the good things there, because if you had never done anything but the Matt Harris interviews, that was extraordinary as far as I was concerned.
Well, Matt, I feel like is a brother.
Yeah.
And I got to show everybody, this is Chris's book. And if you don't have it, why not? You got to get it. Oh, Steve's got it too.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I'll have
So-
you know, Christopher, when I was at the Mormon History Association, I was going around passing out my cards to people, and they have these BYU students who are like kind of volunteers, you know, and stuff. And I saw this young man, and I handed my card and tell him what I'm doing. He said, you know, there's this great book called A Pentecostal Reads the Book of Mormon. I said, I've had him on, watch my channel, check out the interview. So, you know, you're known, you're an unknown entity. People know who you are.
Big
Well,
fish in our small Mormon pond.
there you go. And I kind of quite like that, actually.
So, Steve, can you tell us a little bit, what are some of your favorite episodes of your last 100?
And we know which two better be on the list.
Well, you know, I think the one that really was amazing to me was with Mark Staker. Early on, I have him on. And then he said, okay, I'll come back on to reveal those pollen results studies on Tunbridge Farm. So what they were growing at the time, Joseph Smith Sr. was growing at the time when they lived there in Vermont in the 1790s. And then finally, it had to go through a centrifuge. I think it was at University of Utah. And you go through a centrifuge, and we were waiting patiently for the results. So like every week during the summer, we were like, he was giving me updates and then writing me emails telling me, okay, you know what, thanks for reminding me, I'll check in with them. You know, so during the entire summer, he's giving me updates about all the stuff about the pollen. And then finally he says, okay, I got him. I said, okay, that Tuesday he gets it. That Tuesday he gets the results. A few hours later, I'm interviewing him. And then I think that the next night, I don't remember if it was the day of or the next day, either way, I broke the news, breaking news, you know, the results of the pollen study. Well, he could have gone on any program, but he wanted to come on mine, and to have somebody from the church historian's office to come on my program and do that to me it was a real important thing to me. So that's just something that really sticks out. But, you know,
You got to give us the pollen results in case people don't know what you're talking about. What was Joseph Smith Sr. farming?
They were planting hops to make beer.
They were beer makers.
So so that was just an interesting
I'm out,
thing.
guys. I got to go. I can't stay in anything talking about beer.
Yeah, that's holiness. He's talking about holiness there, you know. So so then I think that when I think about some of the guests that I've had, that first of all have taken the time to talk to me. You know, people don't realize, you know, I do a pre-interview Zoom with my guests typically before I actually do the actual interview. And I had to do that early on, especially so they could get to know me, right? They didn't know who I was. Now people know who I am, so I don't have to do it as much. I don't have to talk as much because they have an idea now what I'm doing. But it was great because they got to know me and we felt comfortable. So when we take the interview, the interviews always just went very smoothly and very comfortable. And so then when I started talking to young people, like millennials, I was like, okay, how am I going to talk to these guys, you know, and because I just didn't know, you know, they speak a different language than I do, you know, so I was kind of worried. So when I had like Rebecca Jensen on, who wrote The Liminal Sovereignty, you know, I was like, okay, you know, first of all, I really need to have female guests on, and then she's a millennial, so I'm a little like nervous, and the interview went out without a hitch, hit it off with her very well. And I just thought that was like an important thing to me. And then just to move on to, of course, Richard Bushman was important and Sandra Tanner was important. You know, the big ones with all the big views have good reason to, you know, obviously be ones that I would want to do. But I also like how, in addition to the pollen study, you know, Thomas Murphy comes on my program to reveal original research, unpublished research, that he then comes on my program specifically to talk about. And then to tie that in with Don Bradley and with Thomas, they both specifically wanted to come on my program to talk about their personal faith journeys, you know? And it was like, wow, like that was really important to me, you know? I mean, I was just shocked by that, you know, that I'm literally, the channel is in some sense contributing to the conversation and to it's actually affecting the conversation going on within Mormon scholarship as well, you know, and it's actually making a contribution. I wasn't seeing that coming. And so, yeah, those are just some examples I could cite. I mean, I could say all my interviews I really love. In one sense, I do. They're all special in their own way. but just the ones that have been impactful like that really have just been surprising to me, because I'm just some guy, some layperson. It's a non-academic channel, but it is making a contribution to the conversation, just like your channel does too, of course. Rick, you broke some news. You revealed some people who wrote some of those gospel topics essays, and stuff like that. So yeah, it's kind of cool when you're involved in making the news story.
Yeah, it is fun. That was really fun when I felt like that was breaking news. It's hard to break news on a history channel because you got to wait for 100 years before it even becomes history. So it's kind of fun to do that. So
yep. So
well, any last things you guys want to cover here with this 100th anniversary episode of Mormon Book Reviews?
Well, I think from my vantage point, Steve, one of the strengths of your program is that it's clear you've been informed by the other podcasts. And so you seem to take advantage then of kind of diving deeper into parts of the stories that have not been fleshed out. I think your interview with Sandra, for example, that looked so much more intently at the Pauline Hancock period. I thought that was really helpful. It's really important, I think, to get things with Sandra on the record, right? She just celebrated her 81st birthday last Friday, and it's a bit like with Gospel Tangents. So many of those Hoffman related interviews, so many of those folk were losing, right? And so I think those are kind of historically significant moments. I think the first interview with Thomas Murphy, on his connections, such as they were with the evangelical tradition, and just his, what a lovely guy, what just a wonderful person. And in the interviews I'd heard with Thomas, I'd never heard that in that detail. And of course his interview, where he is assessing, analyzing some of the arguments with the Heartland theory, to someone like myself who may have a knowledge of a certain slice of all of this, but doesn't have such a knowledge of all of those areas. It was a really helpful guide to me. And again, the same thing with Bushman. You talking to Bushman about stuff that nobody much has talked to him about, right? And there are certain things that have to kind of, go across some of the material that we've heard before with folk. But I think that those have been really important contributions, and I think lifting up people on the margins from kind of a centrist view out, those are really important things to document. And I think the same with Gospel Tangents. Those become kind of primary documents when people come back around to try to do histories. And so, I think your kind of non-troubled presence opens people up in terms of conversations. You're actually wanting to hear from them. I think your location outside the Restoration opens people up because it's not like you have an agenda aside from hearing their perspectives, hearing their stories. And of course, you've introduced me directly and indirectly to people I would probably not have known. Right. And of course, any interview with Matt Harris, I'm going to watch. Right. And so I think it's been a really, having been with you a bit since the beginning, I think it's been a really kind of incredible ride that I know you did not plan out. Right. And so it's nice to have a moment like this to sort of assess and to celebrate, and knowing a little bit about the back stories and how benevolent Rick has been to your program, and some of the interviews that you mentioned that were recorded on his equipment and such. I mean, I think it's just a really nice moment to celebrate all that. And Rick, we've really been blessed by the stuff you've done. Obviously, I hope you feel that for me. I mean, it's before I ever knew you, that was the case. And certainly, Steve, just really, you seem to have good instincts. And I think the thing about the work that the two of you do, not everybody has to like everything. It's a wide audience out there, isn't it? And there'll be certain things that different people really gravitate toward. But I can't imagine, maybe Rick can bring some perspective to this. I can't imagine trying to script a more successful first 100. That would be pretty difficult to imagine.
Yeah,
So,
I think you passed me by, Steve. My first year, I don't think it was this successful.
Oh, wow. And this is what makes it so wild and surreal, is that basically I had just about every other night I had Rick Bennett on, and then the next night I'd have John DeLynn on, and maybe some other, Mormon related channels I'd be checking out. And then early on, I'm talking, co-producing a show with Rick Bennett, and then talking with John DeLynn, and I'm like, I'm part of the sitcom now. It's like I'm on the TV show, I watch every night. And so, that's been the most surreal thing for me, is like, I literally, that was my television viewing, essentially, besides live sports and something I was binging on Netflix, I was watching you guys. And then to just be part of this whole story is just wild to me. Just to get back on a couple things here, Chris, one of the things a lot of people go to me and say is that you had Bushman taking notes. And, people, more than one person has pointed it out to me. I said, yeah, I said, that was a bizarre moment. I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, wait, he's getting out a notebook. Wait, he's writing what I'm saying as I'm saying it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm like telling him things. And then one of the things people don't realize is that there's a couple times in the Bushman interview where I say something and he doesn't respond. Now, I had it on speaker view. And now people might be thinking, well, boy, that was kind of rude. He didn't respond, or maybe that was a bad question. But if you saw what I saw, you saw him with a big smile on his face, a very appreciative smile that he was giving me back. That I thought, oh, I wish the audience could see this because I had in speaker view. So that was like really cool, just to get that kind of affirmation while I'm filming him. And then, the other thing too is, I've had three different people from the Church of Jesus Christ on. And one of the things that really struck me was, of course, Josh Gailey did a great job kind of giving like an apologetic defense of the Book of Mormon, using Christian apologetics arguments in favor of the resurrection. He did for the Book of Mormon. I think it's a pretty compelling argument. But then the amount of LDS women that were fascinated by the Songs design of hymn book. I mean, on YouTube and on Reddit or mostly Facebook, some private Facebook groups, there were LDS women just so fascinated by this story. So just to see that cross-pollination going on and causing these conversations to happen, because on the Songs of Zion, on Becky Targum's, the president of the Women's Auxiliary, the Women's Association in the Church of Jesus Christ, starts answering questions to the LDS women on my page. So they're talking to her, and that to me is just so amazing. And then even yesterday, somebody asked a question to Dan Vogel on one of the one of the comments for our interview, and I thought, I wonder if Dan Vogel reads these. And today he gives his answer to that question. He's reading the answers to the things, and I'm like, wow, and I tell people, I say, your video might only get a couple hundred views, but you'd be very surprised at who's watching, And then just one little thing too is, but you had mentioned, Christopher, about how, like I got informed by the other podcasts, that really was what caused me to start. It was because, like Rick Bennett and John DeLynn have their shows, they have their things that interest them. But that, like, I remember specifically John Hamer, and I don't remember if it was on Mormon Stories. I think it was Mormon Stories, where John Hamer said something really interesting, and John DeLynn did not give the follow-up question that I would have asked. And I was like, I got to get John Hamer on because I got to ask that question. And so to me, it's like when I have guests that have been on Mormon Stories and on Gospel Tangents, I make a point to ask the questions that weren't asked. Nothing against you, Rick. You can, but like when Dan Vogel starts talking about a Presbyterian minister or that minister in England, I gotta go find out more about these ministers. Okay, did they try to witness to you? What church? And then he said, and then Dan Vogel says, oh yeah, the guy in England was Elam. He was a Pentecostal. I don't think anybody ever knew that. So I'm able to go down those roads and get new information out there, complementing the work that you do. But from an outsider's perspective, I have, you have questions that I wouldn't think to ask, and then I'm doing the same thing from that perspective. So I really feel like we're documenting history, and stories are being told that would otherwise be untold, and so to me that's an important contribution that we're making, and yeah, after 100 episodes to do what's happened is pretty remarkable. But yeah, that kind of just summarized there, a little bit. But yeah, I just find this to be a very interesting thing.
I think my head's going to explode.
Well, let me go ahead and prick it. Rick, George Throckmorton.
Oh, he's awesome.
Those were great interviews,
yeah.
Man. So I mean, I let me just say I appreciate being invited into this conversation, and appreciate very much having been with both of you on your shows, and what I would say is it's always nice to be with people who really have a passion for what they're doing. And I guess we all know in this world people who are strapped with things they have to do, and they're faithful and they do what they have to do. But then to be with people who have a real passion about it, who aren't making, tens of dollars, let alone tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, it's just, from my vantage point, it's just delightful. And I hope that both of you will continue to do this just as long as you have the passion, and it will benefit all of us.
Well, I know Steve's making tens of dollars because I subscribe to his Patreon. So
thank you. Appreciate it. Yep. That's right. I want to thank all my Patreons, by the way. Appreciate it. And if you haven't signed up yet, please sign up.
Well, Steve, I know that I'm your guest host, but do you want to go ahead and sign off the way you normally do?
Sure. So I want to thank both of you for coming onto the program. Rick, thank you so much for hosting it tonight. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure, as always.
And Christopher,
I guess this is my first time. I shouldn't say as always, but
that's it's all good. And then Christopher, thank you. For being my friend. Folks don't realize this, but maybe not every week. Sometimes it would be, but every other week, every few weeks, Christopher get together for a couple hours and just hash things out. And Christopher, you made the analogy the other day about how when you're in a foreign country and you hear another American voice, I said, sometimes we just need to sit down and have that conversation so we can because the worlds we live in don't enter the orbit of the restoration. And so yeah, that's kind of cool. We're able to just kind of make sure keep each other grounded, right?
Right. It's good to talk with somebody that's bilingual,
exactly,
in a different way.
Yeah.
So thanks for the invitation, Steve. I'm delighted by it, and obviously have been beneficiary of your work.
Well, Hey, it's just really an honor to just be able to do this, and it's been able to sell a few copies of this for you, man. That's awesome. So, folks, I just want to thank you so much for joining this very special 100th episode of Mormon Book Reviews. I just want to remind my audience to if you want to make a contribution to the program, please support our Patreon page. Also want to remind you that we are on all the major podcast platforms. So check us out in a podcast format. And I also just want to remind you to check out our website, mormonbookreviews.com. My email address, by the way, is mormonbookreviews@gmail.com if you wish to contact me. And just a reminder to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the reminder bell to get a notification when a new episode comes out. You all have yourself a great day.
All right, and here's to 100 more.
Sounds good.